She was already gone when I opened it. I'd found it wedged under the bench in the coffee shop, burgundy leather, corner worn soft, initials stamped in gold that had mostly rubbed off. I almost left it at the counter. I almost walked out. But there was something about the way it sat there, half hidden, like it had given up on being found, and I opened it instead. $800, cash in a side pocket, 2 credit cards, a library card from a town I'd never heard of, a photo of 2 little girls in matching red coats, and a folded piece of paper, handwritten, that said, "If lost, please call Mara. She will answer," followed by a number. I sat back down. I called the number. It rang 4 times. Then a voice said, I know. Please tell me you have it." Her name was Mara Voss. She'd been at the coffee shop an hour before me. She'd lost the wallet, realized it on the subway platform, turned around, and found the bench empty. The $800 was rent. Not I have rent in my wallet, her actual rent, for an apartment she was about to lose, because her bank account had been frozen after a dispute with her landlord that she hadn't finished fighting yet. I told her where I lived. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. She showed up in 20 minutes wearing a coat that was still damp from the walk over. Her hair was dark and she was shorter than her voice on the phone suggested, and the first thing she did when I opened the door was say, "I can't believe you called. I really can't believe you called." "You left instructions," I said. "I always leave instructions," she said. "Nobody ever calls." I handed her the wallet. She held it against her chest like a kid holding something she thought was gone forever, and I watched her and thought, this is the whole story. This is the beginning and the end. I'll never see her again. That was fine. It felt like the kind of thing that was supposed to be brief and clean and good. Then she said, "Can I sit down? I think my legs are still shaking." So she sat down at my kitchen table, and I made tea, and she told me about the landlord. His name was Gerald Fenn. She said it the way people say the name of someone they've been arguing with for so long it stopped being a name and became a sound for a whole category of bad things. He owned the building she'd lived in for 4 years. He'd been trying to get her out for 8 months. First by raising the rent beyond what her lease allowed, then by claiming the raise was a clerical error and filing a noise complaint. Then by filing a second noise complaint. Then by abruptly disputing a bank charge related to last month's rent in a way that somehow froze her entire account pending review. "He wants my apartment," she said. "It's rent stabilized and he wants to renovate the whole floor. I'm the last person on the floor who hasn't taken his buyout." "How much was the buyout?" "He started at $12,000. He's up to $22 now. Did you take it?" "No." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "My daughter goes to school 4 blocks away. My mother lives 6 blocks the other way. I've been in that apartment since before either of those things were true. $22,000 doesn't buy me another 4 blocks to either of them." I asked her what happened with the bank account. She said a formal dispute took 30 to 45 business days to resolve, and her account was frozen until then, and she'd pulled out $800 in cash before it locked. The amount she needed for rent, and then lost the wallet, and the rent was due in 2 days. "If I'm late," she said, "he has another thing to file." She said another thing to file the way people say another thing to file when the filings have started to feel like a weather system. Not dramatic. Just relentlessly, procedurally bad. "I'm a paralegal," I told her. "Not a real lawyer, but I've seen a lot of this kind of thing." She looked at me. "What kind of thing?" "Landlords who file things," I said. "Until someone files back." She left with the wallet and a folder I'd printed from my personal files. Templates for a rent dispute response, a counter complaint with the housing board, and a letter to her bank that might cut the freeze resolution time in half if submitted through the right department. I told her I wasn't making promises. I told her I was just someone who'd happened to find a wallet and happened to know the paperwork. She stood in my doorway and looked at the folder and said, "Why are you doing this?" I didn't have a good answer. Something about the photo of the two girls in the red coats. Something about the handwritten note, "If lost, please call Mara," that assumed the worst and hoped for the best simultaneously. Something about the way she'd said, "I really can't believe you called," like the bar for believing in people had been set somewhere underground. "You left good instructions," I said again. She laughed once, short and real. "I'll come back and tell you how it goes. You don't have to." "I know," she said, "but I want to." She came back on a Thursday. I hadn't expected it. It had been 11 days. She knocked at 7 p.m., and when I opened the door, she was holding a bottle of wine and looking slightly triumphant and slightly wrecked. The way people look when something has resolved in their favor, but only after a long fight. "The bank account is unfrozen," she said. "I sent the letter to the department you specified. 4 days, not 45. 4. That's faster than I've ever seen it work." "I know. I actually cried in the bank." She held out the wine. The housing board also acknowledged receipt of the counter-complaint. Fenn's lawyer called my landlord phone number and left a message that sounded like it was trying to be casual and wasn't. She paused. "I think he's scared." I opened the door wider. "Come in and tell me everything." She came in and she told me everything. It took 2 hours and 1 full bottle of wine, and at some point we moved from the kitchen to the couch, and she told me about her daughter, whose name was Nina, and who was 8, and extremely opinionated about breakfast foods. And she told me about her mother, who had moved here from Hungary when she was 26, and still called the city, with an emphasis that suggested no other city existed. She told me she'd been alone for 3 years since her divorce. Not sad about it. Not performed bravely, not sad. Just genuinely alone in the way some people are, that had become its own shape. I told her about my work. I told her I'd been a paralegal for 9 years and had genuinely thought at 32 that I'd go to law school, and at 37 had genuinely stopped thinking about it and found, to my surprise, that I was fine. I told her I lived alone and ate well and knew the name of every plant in my apartment. "How many plants?" she said. 14, I said. 15 if you count the one in the bathroom that might be dying. She laughed and said, "That one definitely counts." It was the kind of conversation that arrives already going, like someone turned it on before you got there. At 10 o'clock she said she had to get home to relieve the babysitter and stood up and put on her still slightly damp coat, and I thought, she's going to say thank you again and I'm going to say it was nothing, and that will be the whole of it. Instead she said, "Do you want to come to dinner on Saturday?" Me and Nina. Nothing formal. I make a very mediocre pasta and she's very interested in meeting the plant man. She knows about the plants? I may have mentioned you. Once or twice. I'd like that, I said. Gerald Fenn's attorney sent a formal withdrawal of the disputed charge 3 weeks later. The housing board opened an inquiry into the noise complaints, citing a pattern of instrumentalized complaints against a single long-term tenant in language so dry it took me a minute to realize it was actually damning. Fenn came back with a buyout offer of $31,000. Mara turned it down. She showed me the letter she sent in response. Clear, formal, 3 short paragraphs. The second paragraph said that she had no intention of leaving, that she was aware of her rights under the stabilization ordinance, and that she intended to continue exercising them. "Did your lawyer help you write this?" I said. "I don't have a lawyer." "Did a paralegal help you write this?" She smiled. I wrote it myself. But I had a good teacher. The dinner on Saturday had been pasta, technically mediocre, and Nina had pulled me by the hand to see the fish tank in her room and explained each fish in exhaustive detail, and then told me seriously that the one called Gerald was kind of a bully. I'd looked at Mara over the top of Nina's head. She'd put one hand over her mouth to keep from laughing. There's a version of this story where I left the wallet at the counter, where I walked out and the woman behind the register found it and called a general number and left a message, and maybe it worked out, or maybe it didn't. There's a version where I called the number on the slip of paper and Mara said thank you, and I said of course, and we both felt briefly good about the world and then forgot each other completely. There are 100 versions of any moment where you almost keep walking. I've been thinking about that a lot, how many times I've almost kept walking, and how the times I stopped were never the heroic ones, never the ones I could see coming. They were always just a small thing with an instruction attached. If lost, please call. I called. I don't know what this is yet. I know she's coming over next week to see if the bathroom plant can be saved. I know Nina has asked, via text relay, whether I have any fish that are nicer than Gerald. I know that on Tuesday morning I found a card in my mailbox, handwritten, that said, "Thank you for picking it up." Most people walk past things. I kept it. I'm keeping a lot of things lately that I would have set back down. Have you ever had one of those moments where you almost didn't stop? And then you did. And something that looked ordinary turned out to be the thing that changed everything? And what about the person in your life who quietly showed up when you were in the middle of losing something? The one you didn't think to notice until you really needed them. If either of those hit somewhere real, drop it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because we put a new story here every week.